Finish your granola
Hi,
bar.
Ron. Thank you. Yeah, I'm still chewing on a granola bar, but I think I can talk.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Vacation out this week, and I got to tell you, I went to see this film concerned. I was concerned going in, and the laughter was amazing. Everybody was loving this film. I think it's one of the toughest things to pull off because it's not a remake, and yet the tone of the original film runs all the way through it. I
That's
believe.
a huge compliment. Thank you. And I I shared your trepidation reading the script. I was concerned and kind of not that excited about doing it until I read this script and realized, oh, this is the next generation. This is Rusty's story. We've never seen adult Rusty before, so I get to create this character and bring my own instincts to it, and that really made it feel like just this really fun, open opportunity to play in the Griswold universe, which has meant everything to me as a kid.
Yeah. Well, I don't even think that the sequels that they did years ago captured the tone of the first one. I thought that they kind of went off and did things because I think it's one of the hardest things to do to pull off that kind of comedy, whether it's Vacation or whether it's like some of the films that Paul Feig or Judd Apatow do,
Sure,
where you're putting together a lot of laughs and yet have to create a weird reality where this stuff could happen.
Yeah, and you have to kind of push. You have to sort of push reality in a way. I think it's this delicate cocktail of audacity and tenderness.
Yeah,
and Judd Apatow does that so beautifully, and Paul Feig does too. I mean, both those guys I love and admire, and I think John Francis Daley and Jonathan Goldstein, this is their first movie, and they knocked it out of the park in terms of telling a kind of, at its heart, a sort of poignant family story, just wrapped in the most whacked out, ridiculous, insane package.
Right. Well, people that are of a certain age will look at this and know it's hard to be a son, and then it's also hard to be a father.
Right.
That's why these things work, because I always think that the father is somewhat on the outside of every family, and then he uses the vacation as isn't life great, kids.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
You get 1 week to nail it.
Right. And aren't I awesome? Like, aren't
Yeah.
I just the greatest patriarch? That's so funny. I remember Stephen Colbert told me once that something about how the reason your kids will always love their mother more is because or the reason your wife will love your kids more and vice versa is because they are blood relatives. To her, you're just some jerk she met in a bar. And I think you're right. Like every dad is overcoming that reality all the time.
Well, there's a reason I think that dads have to keep pictures of their family on their desk. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah. That's the people at home. Mothers don't need that. They're thinking about it 24 hours a day.
They're wired. Sure.
Yeah. But see, I think that's the initial genius of this. And by the way, when I was watching you, I was thinking Jack Lemmon. You know what I mean? Young Jack Lemmon role, which is the guy who wants everything to go well, and it doesn't. And yet, even underneath all this niceness, there's some kind of rage.
That is a just mega compliment because I really love Jack Lemmon. And I think that's very perceptive. That's exactly right. There's a frustration, a rage that things aren't going the way that the character wants, despite their best efforts. And the reason for that is that they have these wonderful intentions and good values, and they just don't have the tools. They don't have or the confidence or the social graces to kind of to make the situation work the way they want. And I relate to that. I think a lot of people do to some extent or another, but I relate to Rusty Griswold. I think it also is something kind of intrinsic in Andy Bernard, maybe in a little bit more dysfunctional way. But I have tremendous compassion for characters who who want to do better and be better people, but just get in their own way.
You sure? Yeah, because it's hard to be alive. It's hard to do life.
It's hard to move through this world.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not easy, and particularly when you feel like I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and now I'm not getting paid off.
I'm supposed to be, like, I think I'm doing this right. I hit all the checklist. Why am I riddled with anxiety and terror?
Yeah,
and I feel unloved despite like tremendous outpouring of love. You know, we just have all these mental blocks and hurdles,
and that is, you know, that goes hand in hand with comedy. Like when you talk to comedians, they're never truly satisfied at any time.
I think there is something, there's a sort of intrinsic neediness in comedians. I love what Judd Apatow said on some podcast. He said that for the moment that people are laughing at me, I know they don't hate me. for just that instant. Yeah. Or so, I butchered it, but it's something like that. But it's I love that idea, you know, because it nicely sums up what I think is a very common comedian's worldview, which is kind of trepidation and an assumption that an assumption that you're disliked, or an assumption at some very base level.
Sure.
Yeah, that's hard. So laughter is a way to sort of, I don't know, soothe that.
Yeah, it's something that, you know, obviously you don't want to be too content and then go out and try to make comedy.
Right.
You know what I mean? It would work against you. You know, we were talking about you worrying if they got it right. The writer-directors had to be out of their minds to know that what they were up against. Was there any of that feeling on the set, or did you guys feel like you were in the pocket the whole time?
Well, I think that by the time we started shooting the movie, we had all gotten past the any baggage that we brought to it in terms of feeling the weight of the originals or feeling the expectations of the audience. You kind of have to put that aside because that kind of stuff will just get in the way of creativity and get in the way of a confident execution. So we really didn't dwell on that stuff once we got started. I think we all felt incredibly confident about the material. The guys wrote a damn funny script.
Sure, it's really, really great.
Yeah.
And I said, you got to match John Hughes at that point. You know, John Hughes is the guy who wrote the original script, and then he ended up taking over comedy in the 80s. And these guys were there for that. I mean, it's a really fun compliment to say, like, I'm laughing, but I watched this screening with a lot of young people who some of them weren't getting the old Vacation jokes at all, you know?
Yeah, well, and that's part of that's part of that meta joke that we set up in the beginning, where, you know, this vacation will stand on its own. I think, which is an expression of both our acceptance of the baggage, but our excitement and confidence in this material. And it was important. I think we all felt a need to convey that to the audience in a kind of ironic meta way. But it's honest. It's a really honest expression, and I hope I think it does reflect that kids don't have to have any context.
No, I don't think so at all, other than their own parents. You know what I mean? Other than taking road trips, which is the best, worst vacation anyone could ever have.
Sure.
My family is the only thing that we ever talk about when we get back together, these nightmare, weird trips, and why did our dad take us there? But we don't remember much else from third grade, you know what I mean? But we remember the fishing trip to Canada. You know?
Well, I love that Rusty in this movie has so completely whitewashed the memory.
Yeah.
You know, he references the experience of the original Vacation movie, which, as we know from watching that movie, was horrendous for all of them.
Sure.
And yet it's such a fond memory for him. And that's part of that fatherhood process of just kind of deciding the kind of dad you want to be and what you want to provide for your family. And I think it's kind of adorable, but it's a little sad, but also really
Sure,
kind of
yeah.
It's admirable. In him.
It's kind of that sins of the father keep going on from the Bible.
Yep,
But I think it's probably true of all adventure. You know, no one ever talks about Lewis and Clark saying, "Oh, we had to shit in the woods and there was mosquitoes." You know, they're just like, "Oh, it was amazing."
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I'm sure every adventure was horrendous in history.
Yeah.
And yet that's our goal, is to go out and have them. But the weird thing about this, you did a road movie, but you went home to shoot it, right? You were
That's exactly right.
You were back in Atlanta.
We shot almost all of it in Atlanta, which is where I grew up, and little bits and pieces elsewhere. The whitewater rafting stuff we did in North Carolina, which is where I went to summer camp for years. So very nostalgic kind of place for me to be.
You'd never shot back home all these years?
No, I never shot it. Like, so many movies shoot in Atlanta now, and this was my first one.
So being back there, how do you not go out, you know, to your aunt's house for dinner and bowling with the boys?
I did all of those things.
You did them all anyway.
I played golf with high school buddies a bunch, and my mom was on set probably 80% of the time.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Had that ever happened?
No, no, God no. But she just became part of the crew basically, and she's a very kind and curious person. So she just went up to every crew member. You know, what do you do? And what's this? what is this chord? Or what is that? And everybody kind of just fell in love with her, and by the end she was basically like directing the movie. You know, she'd say, like, the directors would turn to my mom, "What do you think, Pam?" And she'd say, "Too many curse words."
Yeah, it's not. There's a lot of scenes in there probably not perfect for your mom.
Yeah,
to be hanging around with.
No. In fact, the scene where I describe or I attempt to define a rim job for my older son. My mom was on set that day and came up to me in the middle of it and just said, I don't get it. What is a rim job?" And I had to explain to my mother what a rim job is. Like that scene that I with my son happened for real with my mom.
They're like, keep rolling. This is perfect. But that, I guess, added to that family thing for you down there.
Absolutely. I think it was a really strangely happy time for me making this movie, because I haven't lived in Atlanta for over 20 years. And so to go back and spend 2 months there, and really I lived I got this condo less than a mile from the house I grew up in, and it just was everything, just the streets and the driving around. It put me right back in a very nostalgic, family-oriented mindset, and that was kind of perfect for making this movie.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? And sometimes it's just one little sight or a taste or a smell or a sound, and you just go right back.
Totally.
Yeah.
There's a creek that runs behind my house, and or my old house, the house I grew up in, and it had this sort of peculiar stink.
Yeah, sure.
And it didn't smell bad. It was just sort of an organic, like urban waterway smell, and that same creek went behind this condo that I stayed in. So I would walk out to the car in the morning and smell this, and it just was like, oh my God, I'm 13 again.
Yeah, it just happens that quick. You time travel.
Yeah.
You lost the accent growing. Did you do that on purpose, or because no one would guess that you're from the South?
Yeah, it was not a really deliberate thing. I went to college in Ohio, and I think that's sort of where it dissipated. But I grew up with an accent, not a strong accent, because I grew up really in the city of Atlanta, but which is very cosmopolitan. But I watch, I have these videos of high school plays that I was in, like All My Sons, Arthur Miller, very dramatic Arthur Miller play, and I'm like, I'm talking like this, and I can, as Dr. Jim Bayless. This is, how dare you do whatever Arthur Miller lines.
Yeah.
And it's I'm like, wow, I really did have an accent. But college, I think, is where it dissipated. Then I moved to New York City right after college.
Yeah.
And it just kind of evaporated.
But you were a theater kid. You knew this was something pretty early on that you wanted to do.
Yeah, I did some plays in high school and a little bit in college. Funny thing is, I never quite identified with the theater scene because it felt a little precious to me or something. And really all I cared about was that kind of audacious Eddie Murphy, balls out comedy.
That was the guy for you, Eddie Murphy, when you were a kid?
Eddie Murphy was the guy for me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I worshipped that guy. There was something about his energy. I just wanted to. He was so free and natural, and just had this swagger that I thought was so intoxicating.
Yeah. It's hard to explain to people who weren't there for it what a gigantic, bigger than life star he was. I mean, he was Elvis. He was Michael Jackson. Every concert was huge. Every movie was gigantic. And then to look back and see how young he was when that happened.
Yeah, he was like 18 on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, it's insane.
Insane.
Yeah. And without a worry in the world, it looked like. Just like here,
exactly.
I'm here to take over.
And that's the best comedy. I mean, that's when you can feel that someone's at home in those performances, and you could tell, like, oh, this is Eddie Murphy being the best version of himself.
Yeah.
And Steve Martin and Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd and all those guys, those were, like, if I could have I had Star Wars action figures, but I really wanted action figures of those guys.
Yeah, right.
Because I don't know why, but from a very young age, that all of that comedy is all I cared about.
Well, it was a real golden age of summer comedy, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Like every year there would be something really big and something funny. And that is, I think, at the same time that the VHS got big, so you could watch a comedy over and over. Like, people didn't watch Peter Sellers 150 times and were able to figure it out. But with those guys, you lived with it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and we got HBO when I was pretty young. I can't remember when cable TV started, but it was around.
Yeah, it came to each town a little later or whatever, but it was real early 80s by the time it was everywhere.
And my dad was always, kind of a TV junkie, so he got the cable package right out of the gate, and HBO just played all these great movies on a loop, like Spies Like Us and Ghostbusters and all this, and I was like a little gerbil at a water bottle, like just chugging these comedies.
It's always funny, like sometimes you find out years later, like, oh, Three Amigos wasn't a gigantic hit. You know what I mean? But it was one of those things that ran a lot, and everyone loved it.
I just watched it recently because I just it came to mind, and I loved it so much, and I saw it probably 400 times when it came out, but I hadn't seen it in years, so I just pulled it up the other night, and it is so good.
Yeah,
it's so
funny.
good.
Yeah,
and it wasn't a huge hit.
No,
because now we have all the internet and all the metrics, and we can look things up. And I was watching it, just reveling in it, and I was like, God, I wonder how this movie did when it came out, and I looked it up. Didn't do that great.
Didn't do well at all.
Makes no sense.
Yeah, the critics were hard on it, and then you're like, for the Randy Newman soundtrack alone, there's just really hilarious songs and everything. It's seamless.
Blue shadows on the trail. I mean, that's good stuff.
Yeah, it's really, really strong. But so that's the stuff that you grew up with. It's in the back of your mind, but did you know this could be a job for me? I could keep going in this direction, or?
For some reason, I don't know why. I had this really tenacious drive to kind of to get into it, and I moved to New York right after college, and I didn't quite allow myself to dive in for a year or two because I think I was just in denial or something. I got a normal job and but the whole reason I was here was just to get into the comedy scene in New York. And after a year or two, I was like, I'm going for it, and I just dove in. And
I think it's a fear of people who are actually funny to do it. It's harder if you're actually funny to make that first step, because you think, if I don't measure up, now my fantasy is gone.
Yeah,
you know, my daytime fantasy.
Listen, that is everything in life.
Yeah,
I mean, I think everyone shares a fear of effort because that's how you fail. But it's also the only way to succeed.
Sure, exactly.
So we just have to put ourselves out there. But I mean, there are other areas of my life where fear is much harder to overcome. But for some reason in comedy, I was able to kind of like clamp down and go for it. And it's all I wanted to do. And I put my whole heart into it.
So was that with UCB? Was that
well, the first? So UCB hadn't landed in New York when I first got here. So I started. The first thing I did was an improv class at Chicago City Limits, which I don't even know if it's still there.
I'm not sure if it's there either.
But it was an improv theater on the Upper East Side, and a really great outfit that was there for a long, long time, and a bunch of those people wound up migrating over to UCB when UCB got here. But I did that, and then I really just did stand-up. I mean, I did tons and tons of just the lowest bottom of the barrel stand-up gigs imaginable. I mean, basements on the Lower East Side with 4 or 5 people in it, and Surf Reality was a really special venue back then, and Collective Unconscious, and they were these. That was down on Rivington, and Surf Reality was on Allen Street, I think.
So you were doing the alternative places more than the established clubs?
Well, that's the only place to start.
Yeah.
You can't. I mean, everyone starts in the alternative places. You have to kind of simultaneously log hours hanging out at the bar in the comedy clubs, just to sort of inject yourself into the community. This was sort of the process 15, 20 years ago. I don't know what it's like now.
No, it hasn't changed much. Everything that you're explaining, and there is a romance to that and a frustration.
Absolutely,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
I always think of, remember that Richard Dreyfuss movie where he was the off-Broadway actor in New York, and when I was a kid, I saw that, I go, that seems fantastic.
Right.
But it's just horrible, at the
tough,
same time.
Yeah. But what was cool about it at that time was that none of my comedy friends, none of us were successful. None of us had any baggage, and all we wanted was to just get a spot at the Comedy Cellar, or like a spot, or like a pre-show opening hosting gig at the at the Boston Comedy Club, which is not even there anymore.
Yeah.
And all of these the success was measured in such small increments.
Right.
And we all, the people who were super committed and out every single night from, 8 p.m. till 2 a.m, we all, there was a understanding of kind of who was committed, and everybody, it was a fairly tight-knit group, and an exciting time,
because it has to be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you don't have that, the people that you're kind of suffering through with, you've got nothing. Sure.
And then there are a lot of people kind of dabble and come in and dip their toe and sort of hang out for a month or two, and you kind of get and maybe they were super talented, but they didn't have the commitment to ride it out.
And that is the thing about New York. If you say, look, I'm not going to put up with this, New York goes, okay, we'll see you later.
Exactly.
You get out. That's fine. There's not this list of regret that New York has about people who wouldn't put up with the shit.
Right.
But that is, I think what's a little different that you did is that you were doing improv and stand-up. A lot of people feel like they have to make a choice, like they don't go together.
Yeah, and I think that part of that is a result of how the comedy community in New York was evolving at that time.
Right.
Because when I first got here, there was no improv scene. It wasn't a thing.
It was
really
a Chicago thing.
It was all Chicago, and that was that was something that I had thought about. Do I go to Chicago or do I go to New York? And I decided New York was a better fit for me. And I really wanted to do stand-up in the vein of Chris Rock and Adam Sandler and Jimmy Fallon and these guys who had kind of and Eddie Murphy, who had tracked into Saturday Night Live through stand-up versus the Chicago route. I just, for some reason, felt like it fit me better. But then after a bunch of years in the stand-up trenches, UCB arrived. And I was in a sketch comedy group at that time also. I was just trying to sort of cultivate everything I could. But when UCB arrived, it kind of lit a match in a room full of propane. Like that, there was all of this potential energy that had been untapped. So when UCB said, "Hey, we're setting up a theater and we're teaching improv classes," it just like something gelled in the city, and it was this weird, funky place with a lot of super weird people, and wonderfully talented people that needed an outlet, and it became intoxicating and just a great place to be. But because it was so new, so many stand-up comedians were also kind of interfacing with it, like me and lots of others. And UCB was smart because there was no chip on their shoulder. There was no kind of, oh, we're improv only.
Right, because they were new and they didn't have to worry about the old rules.
So a lot of the shows at UCB were these hybrid shows with improv and stand-up comedians, and it was a really kind of this beautiful mixture that happened, and I think it was unique to New York because my understanding was that in Chicago they were very separated scenes.
Yeah, I only know Jeff Garlin is the only one who ever did both, and they said you got to pick, and he goes, "No, I don't."
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which is really funny, you know, and that goes to show his attitude, but it goes to show, he did fit in both those worlds. But what was cool for you too, being at that right place at the right time, is the media suddenly put attention on UCB that they don't normally give the clubs. You know what I mean? They kind of treat it like, oh, there's an art form happening here, and then over here it's just a bunch of drunks heckling. You know what I mean? So suddenly they were like, and of course, I guess Lauren right away started paying attention to UCB.
Yeah. Well, it was right out of the gate, Conan O'Brien started to tap UCB Theater for all of the late night sketches.
Right.
So that became this really exciting thing because it was a pretty underground operation.
Literally. Literally underground.
Yeah. Well, when it first started, it was above ground.
Is that right?
Yeah, it was in an old burlesque theater on 22nd Street. And then it moved to its current place, which is literally underground. But it was this thing where Conan was tapping the Upright Citizens Brigade talent and like random people that we were all hanging out with were getting on TV. And it was just like, holy shit, this is incredible. And suddenly it felt very tangible and real. And like we had this attachment to late night. And of course, Lauren produced Conan's show, and Tina Fey and Rachel Dratch were such good buddies with Amy Poehler and Ian Roberts and Matt Besser and Matt Walsh. Like that, they all came from Chicago together. And Adam McKay, who was such a huge influence on Saturday Night Live, having come from Chicago, he was buddies with all the UCB founders. So there was a lot of cross-pollination right out of the gate with Saturday Night Live and Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and I think that added a lot of romance and mystique and
it was
excitement.
Amazing. And then The Daily Show. You were able to get The Daily Show. You were one of those guys that went on The Daily Show for me and were so natural and everything worked. And you're about one of 10 guys that I went, oh, he shouldn't leave. You know what I mean? Like all those guys are so great on that show. And I go, don't leave. This is the biggest mistake. And then so many people went on to become successful for that show.
It's an incredible place. It's for all of the hard work that I was putting into comedy before I started on The Daily Show, I still had this kind of fast and loose approach to it. I was very, I relied on my instincts, and I kind of improvised. Even doing stand-up comedy, I was kind of loose with my jokes and stuff. But landing at The Daily Show, it immediately became clear you got to button up.
Yeah.
This is about discipline and hard work and long days and long hours, and you got to get it right. And it goes on TV tonight.
Yeah.
And
from the outside, it looks like a half hour of fun.
Yeah.
Oh, what a half hour of fun those folks have.
Yeah. But I mean, there is nothing more fun than all of that hard work to me. But I think it was a definite wake up call. Like, and I'm forever grateful to the show and Jon Stewart in particular as a role model for that work ethic, because I worked hard at comedy before, but I didn't have the discipline and the focus that being a real professional requires.
Down to the second, down to each beat. I mean, at least you have that musical knowledge of where the beats come in, because that show is all about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tight show. I mean, you're sitting there working on scripts and stuff, and there's a producer standing there with a stopwatch.
Right.
Like, how long is that joke?
Yeah.
You know? Oh, I don't know. We got to get it tighter. And yeah.
But I also think that gives that great thing of New York, of the old Dick Van Dyke Show, where the funniest people are in a room together, bouncing stuff around, eating Chinese food. I mean, that's the thing that any young person would love to have. But to walk away from that show, was that a hard choice for you?
Extremely hard choice. Yeah, because at that time, there were two forces at work kind of in my psyche. One was this feeling that I'd been on The Daily Show for 4.5 years, and Colbert was just leaving to do the Colbert Report, and I knew that I'd had a conversation with John that I'll be getting more sort of leading correspondent work, and that was very exciting to me. But at the same time, there was this pushback in the back of my mind. Well, am I actually doing anything different?
Right.
And am I if I stay here longer, am I expanding the perception of me as a performer? Because I knew that I could do more. I knew that I had a lot more capability than this kind of narrow character that I played on the Daily Show, which was a sort of jerkier version of myself. And I was very eager to tap that. I really wanted to do more. So when the opportunity to join The Office came, it was an 8-episode arc originally, and it was 2 months of work. Really fraught decision. I didn't quite know what to do, but I just decided that I'd gotten as far as I had on some tremendous risk and taking big chances, and I decided that this was a risk I was willing to take, in part because I had so much faith in Steve Carell and in Greg Daniels, who created the American Office. I just felt that was going to be a special show and something exciting to be a part of.
Well, you also had it right from Big Tuna. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That annoying thing. I mean, you brought up the jerkier part of yourself. To me, when someone can find that, like Jeffrey Tambor is amazing at that. But I think that you have to have so much.
Now.
Yeah. You have to have so much awareness to go, this is what makes me the asshole sometimes. How do I tap into that? Does that take a lot of study? Was it tough for you to find that?
No, you know what? It's it comes too easily to me. I think
that's so sad.
No, but you know what? It goes back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, which I never questioned Andy Bernard's intention to do the right thing. You know, like he always wants what's best, and I think I always looked at him as somebody with a very benevolent heart, but real issues with shame and rage, and that to me made him a really poignant character, and it made doing his sort of asshole aspects lighter and more fun,
Right?
and because I wasn't judging him for that stuff. I was sort of felt sad for him that when he behaved antisocially, but I could still laugh at it and have fun with it. And I think that's sort of my way in. Does that make sense?
No, it does.
Yeah.
But you have to have some kind of backstory in your mind of what happened to him to get him to this point, and then not necessarily share that with the audience.
Yeah,
you know? I mean, you have to care about the guy.
Well, I have to like him, and it's hard for me to do, characters that seem unredeemable, or just like overtly psychotic or evil in some way. And there were some sort of story arcs for Andy that I struggled with because I couldn't find that heart that I always tried to get in there.
Right.
And but it's you don't have as much control over all of that stuff sometimes.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you had to feel bad for him when he failed. When it didn't work out for him, the audience had to think, you know what? I don't always like him, but I don't want to see him in this position. That's how, to go back to Tambor, he had that thing where you hated to see him win and you hated to see him lose.
Yeah.
It's just this
There's so much sadness in his face. It's he is just such an automatically poignant character.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Whatever he does.
There's certain guys that can pull that off. Regal does it now. Gervais can do it very, very well. Carell had that same exact thing where
absolutely
you don't want to see him succeed, and then you hate when he fails.
Yeah,
it's a strange place.
Yeah, it's a really delicate line to walk.
It's the way we kind of feel like everyone that we work with. When you think about it, those are the people that somewhat become family, even though who wants them to?
Right, right. It's my parents struggled with The Office. They I think were of a generation where awkward situations and awkward confrontations are not funny at all. They're just awkward and they're just kind of icky.
Right.
And I think that that what makes them funny to this generation is an awareness of that you can root for someone in an icky situation or someone who's behaving horribly. And that there can be, it is more nuanced. Like there can be good intentions behind it.
Yeah, I think that probably started with Spinal Tap, like Christopher Guest's films got into that thing of, oh my God, this is tense. Why are we laughing at it? This is really, really sad.
Right.
Well, from The Office, of course, you did a summer movie that did a little better than anyone expected to do and turned into a trilogy. The Hangover, did you see that coming? Did you think that thing could become that kind of craze?
No, no idea.
Yeah.
When I got that script and I met with Todd Phillips, the director, it just was it seemed like a really fun movie to do, and I wasn't getting a lot of movie scripts at that time, and it just seemed like a really cool thing to do, but none of us were that well known either. Bradley and Zach and I, and
Bradley surely wasn't the Bradley Cooper he is today.
Of course. I mean, and Zach was a pretty alternative comedian at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that we just all gravitated to the material and thought it would be fun to do, and while we were making it, we were excited and realizing that at least we're gonna like this.
Right.
Like we were having so much fun making it that we knew we were gonna like it, but we didn't know if anyone else would. And then people did, and it was fantastic.
Yeah, but what is that like when you just find out, like, oh, we thought we were gonna do a solid comedy, and then you find out it's a comedy that people are quoting and being crazy about?
Yeah, it's a little bit of an out of body thing because you're part of this thing, but you're also just observing a juggernaut.
Sure.
And you kind of I mean, there's it's hard. I don't know. It's hard to describe.
I think, well, you know, it became one of those movies which was the kind of movies that you grew up loving. You know what I mean? The kind of movie that can be watched 50 times
Yeah.
and someone finds another joke. You know, one of those movies that you're watching the guy not talking, you know? That's when you know you
Yeah.
really got something. Yeah.
I always thought, you know, in my 20s, I had this fantasy of doing a movie. I just wanted to do a movie where a bunch of guys are in a car that's out of control and they're screaming together. Because that to me, it was that simple. Like that to me is like, that's energy. It's irony. It's fun. You're rooting for these guys that are out of control and they're terrified.
Yeah.
And their terror kind of bonds them and makes, you know, kind of, I don't know why, but just that idea is what sort of was what I craved doing in a movie. And The Hangover was exactly that. It kind of gave that exact opportunity, and all three hangovers were all screaming in a car at some point.
I actually lived it. I didn't know it could be a movie. That was literally 8 years of my life was spent that way. And I think that is what really works about that movie, that everyone's woke up in a room with their buddies going, all right, we went too far. That's probably, we're just going to do beers. You know, we're going to really cut down.
Yeah.
Beers and some pills. That's it.
Yeah, there was something very incredible about that story device, because it allowed the guys to behave in this incredibly debaucherous way that, you know, frat boys and everyone else are excited about. And then it also enabled them the next day to be mortified by their own behavior.
Right, yeah.
And that's what made moms and grandparents love it and think these guys are adorable and sweet. And I think that sort of contributed to the mass appeal.
Well, I think that, and of course it had that kind of old army movie, is that we don't leave a guy behind. You know what I mean? We go after our own dude. And the fact that Zach didn't fit in at all, and yet they still, you know, cared about him. You know, but when you get that kind of success, how do you stay as level as you seem to be? How are you not like in a white mink coat and just gold around your neck?
I spun out for a couple of years. Yeah. Just a cocaine blur. No, there's just definitely an adjustment period, and I think the way I've approached almost everything in my life, whether it's my career or my personal life, I just try to look for role models, people who I think are doing it right, especially when I'm in a tough situation. Who do I admire who's been in this situation and how they handled it? And it doesn't necessarily have to be a fraught, difficult situation. It's just like a life circumstance of any kind. And so, you know, there are a lot of movie stars and celebrities that I look up to and think are admirable, and then there are others that I would not want to emulate. And that is a little bit of a compass for me. Sure. And it's all you got in a situation like that, because no one can tell you how to handle it. I mean, there's no Hollywood mentoring program. Sure, right. And I honestly thought, like, I told my agent at one point, I was like, you know, it wouldn't be a bad idea to set up some of your movie stars with up and comers from time to time, because it's scary and you're clueless. Like, you just don't know how to navigate a lot of stuff. But at the end of the day, there are challenges, but it's a huge privilege and super fun for the most part.
Who are the guys for you? Is it like Steve Martin? And I mean, Steve Martin is always, you ever hear of Steve Martin busting up a hotel room or anything, you know?
No.
So always made it look easy.
He is a wonderfully, I've gotten to know Steve over the last few years, and he is an incredibly grounded and kind person. And he is definitely, and has been since childhood, a compass point for me. Others are guys like, you know, it's not rocket science. Guys like Tom Hanks, who have wonderful careers and also wonderful public personas and are presumably wonderful people. I don't know Tom Hanks. I've never met him, but I don't know. And then there are people in my personal life that I just think, oh, I think he's a great dad, or he's he's a great. I like how this person handles their work-family balance. I want to emulate that.
Well, you also had really nice steps to your career as well. I mean, the UCB is like being a star in New York in some cases, and of course with Stewart, then The Office, and then when you get the giant movie, you've had 4 or 5 adjustments to make before then.
Yeah, I was very lucky to have a kind of incremental build, because that I mean, the going from The Office to The Hangover was the largest leap of kind of public awareness of me, but yeah, it would nothing was overnight. Nothing. Yeah. I mean, everything was incremental, and I'm kind of really grateful for that, because it's given my brain some adjustment
just a little
period.
Time, to see how this works.
I remember when Carell did 40-Year-Old Virgin, he said, everybody says, wow, this just happened overnight. And Carell's a great example of someone who just put in the time, from Second City in Chicago, touring company, there's so many great commercials he did way back in the day.
Sure.
And then he and Colbert were writers on the Dana Carvey show with Louis C.K. and all these great people.
Yeah, there were amazing people with that show.
And but I mean, Steve Carell, by the way, is absolutely one of those compass points for me, and it has been for a long time. And Colbert, I really admire. These are guys that I think have great values and great a great work ethic, and they seem to manage their lives in admirable ways.
It's so competitive now that I don't know if you could have the Belushi personality anymore. You know what I mean? I think SNL would have just said, John, this isn't working in the first season now,
Yeah,
it's funny, but so are other people.
It's hard to imagine a movie set that would tolerate something like that too, because it's I don't know, it's hard work, but then again, there are occasionally these maverick talents that are so
big,
bewitching and beguiling and superhuman that we all just kind of bask in their glory and tragedy. Chris Farley, another one.
Well, Vacation is the first time that it seems like you've got the whole ball. Like, you are the cleanup hitter for this. You can't really look around, and who else is going to be able to pull this out? And again, I will say this. I walked in wondering how you guys could pull it off, but everything is there. It's just one of those summer movies that if you look at it, it's just a collection of, one vignette after another. And if any of those drop out, you're in trouble. But it's funny all the way through. Really, really cool to see that.
That means a lot. I really appreciate that. I'm crazy proud of this movie. It just was so fun to make, and it has all of that. I mean, it has a family in a car screaming together, out of control car, and that makes me happy. I got to get that somewhere in everything.
That should be the slug line: a family in a car screaming together. Ed Helms, thank you so much for coming in here and doing this today.
Such a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I'll see you next time. Take care, buddy.